All right, welcome back, everyone. Another edition of the History Buffs after a brief hiatus, thanks to those fascist, sexist, racist, homophobic, xenophobic,
anti-Semitic,
slurring, anti-Semitic. Yes, anti-Semitic. Thank you. Channel Zero guys got the whole
anti-globalists
shut down.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, the anti-globalists. Pushing the far right radical agenda. Those Channel Zero conspiracy guys. So we're back after a brief hiatus, joined as always by Ned Snark, R.A. Minahan, and Austin from New London. Welcome back, guys.
Hello.
Hey, welcome back.
Let's go.
Yep. Good to be doing this again.
We're building back better, right? Is that what we're
building
doing?
back? Yeah, build back better. Yes,
build back better.
Build back.
I just thought of that. I haven't seen it anywhere.
No, no, it has been plastered. Has not been plastered anywhere. So. We really left our fans off on a pretty big cliffhanger. I think we talked last.
I don't think we're gonna know what's gonna happen.
Right, I don't know either. Yeah,
just a quick recap. We're still focusing on the Civil War. Talked last episode about the turning point year, the year of 1863. So the natural progression for this episode would be 1864, and then we figured really just kind of wrap up the war here. We'll go through the different parts of 1864. We were just talking about 1865 before we started. Not a whole lot happens there. It's kind of like if last episode was a turning point, this is I guess you'd say the annihilation of the South, or the
death rattle.
Yeah, the slow, the slow death, the slow decline of the South. The painful, withdrawal of Southern spirit and heart, and really watching them crawl back to the Union with their tail between their legs. By the end of 1865, but we'll get there.
That was really descriptive too. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I thought you were going to put Anaconda in there again. We could.
We'll get back to the Anaconda plan. Don't you worry. But I want to start real quick back at the very end of 1863. And you have obviously not a lot of fighting we talked about really happens toward the end of 63, but something that does happen is Lincoln issuing his Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction, which is basically pardoning anyone who participated in the rebellion if they take an oath to the Union, which is basically a call for soldiers of the South, but also states in general, that if they want to be back in the Union and take place in Reconstruction after the war, they obviously need to take an oath of the Union. It's pretty obvious, I think, looking back, the reason for it, but I think it's a significant part of the story because of what happens in 1864 with things like Sherman's March to the Sea that we'll get to. The Anaconda Plan working. There you go, Ned. So any thoughts on that before we get into the actual battles and stuff of 64? How important do we think this proclamation by Lincoln was? Do we think it's obvious? Do you think it was needed?
Go ahead, Austin.
I guess it's obvious, but I think it was probably like you needed to say it. It's a way for them to start uniting reuniting the United States, getting the Confederate States back in. Because there needs to be a game plan for once they do win the war, because like we already said, the writing's on the wall. They're about to win the war. So how are we going to get these states to rejoin the Union?
I think it's pretty low. It says 10% of the population of the 1860 vote count from rebellious states would have to take the oath in order for them to get back in. I think that's pretty. That means you still have 90% of people are still hate the Union, in your state. Yeah. I think that was very gratuitous. I think that was a little too lenient, but for the time at least, I'm obviously it worked out. But
well, I think the timing too was important because it was right after the Gettysburg and the war is now getting really a war of attrition, a lot more bloody than it was, and it was a nice thing to kind of Lincoln to throw out there to work on their morale, because the South was they were going to fight to the bitter end, but maybe throwing them a bone hey, if you want to quit now and come back,
Also, it's a PR move because of the election.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Morale was kind of low up north because they still had. They beat them in Gettysburg, but they still hadn't had a major battle or a major victory on the East Coast, in the South at this time.
Yeah.
So it would be just a PR move for Lincoln to be hey, voters were trying to end this thing that as non-violently as possible.
But at this point, the war was far from decided. right?
Yeah.
It was, it was trending in the right direction. Obviously, Lincoln will get Grant in charge in a couple months in early 64, but it's trending in the right direction for the North. I think this is kind of going off what you said, RA, going off the heels of, a couple victories, but also, Ned, like you were saying, the Gettysburg Address is, we were talking about earlier, is tomorrow. The anniversary of that's tomorrow, November 19th. So this comes, what was it, 2 weeks maybe? This was December 8th. So yeah, so 2 weeks, 3 weeks after the Gettysburg Address, he issues this proclamation.
Yep. What was the story at the Gettysburg Address? The orator from Massachusetts, Edward Everett Horton, spoke for like 2 hours, and Lincoln
2 hours, and Lincoln did it in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Brought the house down.
There's a famous picture, right, of Lincoln waiting to make the speech, but there's no picture of Lincoln making the speech because he was done before they can get the cameras set up.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I didn't.
Yeah,
I knew it was short.
I've definitely seen the photo.
The photo, he's got his hat off. He's sitting down, and it looks like
okay.
Yeah, it's cool. He's sitting down. He's got his hat off, and it looks like he's looking at the speech while Horton is speaking. And the story was that before, they get the camera set up for Lincoln's speech, he was already done. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 36 seconds or something.
Interesting. I guess I didn't understand the context of the photo. I've definitely seen the photo before.
Yeah.
So what? So his opening act kind of ran long, or what?
Ran long. Exactly. It's like, boy, he learned his lesson from the Lincoln Douglas debates, right? So
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, but he didn't want to stand up there for 3 hours.
Yeah, Lincoln had the wind.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
he could have done it. So that that was the end of 63. Again, not much going on really in early 64. As really was kind of the trend of the Civil War overall. There wasn't too much action in the late months, the winter months in most parts, but especially in the, I guess you call it, the eastern front of the Civil War. So you'll get here's something I found interesting. The first successful submarine attack of the Civil War was in February of 1864. So I enjoyed looked into that a little bit. The H.L. Hunley. Ned, do you know anything about the H.L. Hunley?
Yeah, that's another one, lost with all hands, right? They found it not too long ago.
Yep. And
the remains are still in there.
Yep. Yes. And amazing, actually, there was a 7-man crew and 2 of them survived somehow. I don't know. I must have been close to the surface and maybe.
Oh, you mean escaped? Yeah.
Yeah, escaped. Yeah. So only 5 of the 7 died, which I don't really understand that. But that was a kind of an interesting little side note that you don't really hear about with the Civil War because all the battles, especially in 64, there's bigger things going on. But other stuff I was reading about just this year in general, this was kind of you could tell by the numbers the South was throwing around. This was the South's really last ditch effort to, hold on to what they were hoping to achieve here. I mean, they were throwing out armies of 40, 50, 60,000 when they didn't have much in reserve.
No.
Nope.
Though, and in the West, since they lost Vicksburg, the West, the battles that the Confederates did win, they did do pretty well, but they weren't significant enough to change the tide. The war is now in the East with Sherman, getting ready to go into Georgia and take Atlanta, and then from there, cut the South belly right open. Right. And with Grant just wearing down Lee through, he had more men, so he knew that the war of attrition, he'll end up winning because he has more men.
Yep.
So March 4th, Grant gets called east.
Yeah.
I have that in front of me.
Right. I was going to say that. Yeah.
March 2nd. Yeah.
In early, March 2nd. So in early March, Lincoln finally realizes, hey, maybe Grant's our guy here. Calls him back to Washington, puts him in charge of the whole Civil War operation for the Union. So Grant's in charge of that, but he also does something interesting where he stays pretty much involved with the Army of the Northern Potomac, or excuse me, the
Potomac.
The Potomac, yeah. Thank you. Northern Virginia. So he sets his base camp or his headquarters actually with that army. So he's basically just looking over Meade's shoulder the whole time. Not in charge, but in charge of the whole army, but especially
absolute
that theater.
Power move.
Absolute power move.
Yep.
So that was an early spring of 64, and then you finally get to the actual, the first, I guess, campaigns of 64 with the Battle of the Wilderness, which I didn't know much
Oberlin
about.
campaign.
That was brutal, huh?
Oh yeah.
They called him Grant the Butcher because
Yep.
he was just because, like Ned said, he knew that he had superior manpower. So even though he'd be outmaneuvered, he just kept flanking Lee, knowing that I can throw. But it was the Stalin-esque approach with Soviet Union World War II. It's just like, I've got plenty of people. Like, don't worry about it.
Right.
Yeah, no, it really was. So Grant had over 100,000 men. He had 115,000 men, and that's why I was talking about the numbers earlier. Lee only had 62,000, and even that was a lot for the South at this time,
but Grant had Grant had more than the 100,000 that they could just draft more people, whereas the South was literally running out of people.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So you'll see. So like the first Battle of the Wilderness, which is exactly what it sounds like, it was fought in the western woods of Virginia. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And then Grant just keeps trying to go basically back east towards Richmond, and he'll settle in Petersburg. But that first, I guess, not skirmish, that's too light of a word, but that first engagement of 64, Grant's going to lose almost 18,000 men.
Yep. The battle was considered a stalemate, but for the first time, a Union general didn't retreat or leave the field. So up to that point, even in Gettysburg, Meade retreated. Lee did too, of course. Lee went back south, but they left the field. They didn't pursue the enemy. And this is the first time that's what gave Lincoln hope. Okay, he didn't win the battle outright, but he's not quitting either.
No, they just keep pressing forward.
Keep going forward. Exactly.
Continue going right. So you have Lee.
Manpower.
Lee is basically, on the southern side of the army, as you can imagine. Obviously, that's kind of how the battlefield's naturally shaped out between the South and the North. So you have Grant continuing to work east towards these cities on the coast, and every single engagement, you have Grant losing double, triple the men, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't stop the North. I mean, so just another stat I have. There's another battle by Spotsylvania. So Grant will lose another almost 19,000 men in addition to the 18 he lost earlier. Lee combined losses were less than 18,000 between from the start of the campaign through Spotsylvania, which I believe was early June.
Yep.
Spotsylvania Courthouse looks like it's May.
Late May.
Yeah.
And also at this time too, not only is every life that Lee loses is precious, but he's also losing generals. So at Spotsylvania Courthouse, he lost Jeb Stuart in a
is that right?
A cavalry engagement with Sheridan, I think. And he gets killed. And even though he kind of blew Gettysburg, he was very valuable and knew what he was doing. So his loss was never really replaced. So now you got, you're missing leaders now, right? It's not the Patriots. It's not next man up anymore.
Right.
They don't have anybody else. So it was just a matter of time and really a waste. They should have called it quits by the end of 1864, or I should say by the middle of 1864.
At this point too, how are they doing on supplies? I mean, not necessarily just food and supplies like that. I mean, the South is mostly agriculture. I'm sure they could resupply anything like that, but ammunition and clothing and things like that. How is the South resupplying the army at this point also?
Well, it's funny you mention supplies often because here we go. In for it. Because that same week that Wilderness campaign starts in the east, you have General Sherman, who stayed around in the west after Grant left, begins what becomes known as Sherman's March to the Sea. So that basically the entire mission or what becomes Sherman's entire goal going from, what was it, Tennessee?
It was in Tennessee.
No, so he goes from Tennessee down to Atlanta, sieges Atlanta, and then once he burns Atlanta to the ground, then he goes on his march to the sea.
Yep.
Was marching
right now he's on his way to Atlanta right now.
Was marching to the sea the whole time though?
Well,
not really. No.
The official march to the sea is from Atlanta to which was the 15th was when he left Atlanta. November 15th.
He's going east the whole time.
I mean, technically,
south.
He's marching to the sea. I consider that.
Well, there's still sea in the south, then. I mean, don't you live in Florida?
No, he's going south to Atlanta. Then he's going to turn east. So.
Yeah, then he bangs
God damn it!
Bangs a left, and then.
Yeah, he took 75 south and then took 20 from Atlanta to Savannah.
It was that easy.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it is.
Bottom line is-
Actually, it is. I think it's Highway 20 or maybe it's 16 is his route. Interstate 16 from Atlanta to Savannah is the route.
Anyway, so yes, right now he's on his way to Atlanta.
He's going towards Atlantic, towards the Atlantic Ocean, some might say.
Some might say.
Some might say he stopped in Atlanta first, but
okay.
Right.
All right. So the reason
that
I
went
bring it
nowhere.
up, Austin, great question, is because as he's doing this, he's basically ripping up the underbelly of the South. He's destroying fields. He's destroying anything, I believe it was anything that could help the South wage war.
total war.
Well, so that's the question, though. Is it total war? Because you look at later on in history, you look at things like what the Soviets did in World War II. That's total war. I guess even the Germans killing civilians, the bombing of Dresden, obviously the atomic bomb. I think that's total war. I don't know if it's Sherman.
Well,
I mean,
total war is using everything you possibly can, like all the most modern technology of the day, just because they didn't have the atomic bomb.
Okay, but every war in history,
war.
every war in history does that, though.
No. Did they do that in Vietnam? Have they done that since World War II?
Right. No, they have not.
To a point, though.
It's total war.
They're not flying around in biplanes in the Gulf War.
KDL, it's not called semi-total war.
If it was
I'm
total
married
war,
man. I
it
can lecture you now.
Well, you know what, Ari, but
congratulations, brother.
Ari, could the debate be made that Iraq waged total war as they knew it when the
to the best of their capabilities? Yeah,
they use mustard gas.
Total war for a country is when you use all of your resources, like all your manpower, every technological advance that you have. Like World War I was total war.
Total war. Correct.
World War II was total war.
Correct.
So that's
what Sherman did in the South was total war.
That's the official definition, is using like all of your.
See, I thought there was targeting of like there were.
Yeah, I thought that's what it was.
Civilian casualties and stuff too, though.
I thought total war was like you were not only like attacking the military, but you were decimating the landscape. You're decimating civilian locations.
So like I'd say like the siege of Petersburg would be more total war than like the march to the sea was. Or
so total war is a military conflict of unlimited scope.
Great, that's really specific.
It's way too big.
I'm happy. I'm here all night. I had to help.
All right, so it sounds like we're both right.
But that means civilians.
I think we are both right, but it is, you can kill civilians. You do whatever it takes to win using all of your resources.
Right.
How's that?
Right.
Yeah.
You gotta kill a couple civilians. You gotta kill a couple civilians.
Right. So Sherman wasn't outright
crack a few eggs to make an omelet.
Yep. He wasn't outright killing civilians on site, but if he killed civilians, it didn't really bother him.
Or if you destroyed a cilian's farm.
Oh no, that was part of the plan.
That would be right.
That was intentional. Yeah.
Right.
What he did was he left the Confederate, the remnants of the Confederate army that was defending Atlanta, which I think was 20,000 soldiers. I don't think they were organized; they were dispersed, but they were around Atlanta. He kind of said, "Talk about a power move." He just turned his back on them and said, "All right, we're taking no supplies. We're marching to Savannah. We're going to live off the land." And by the way, living off the land means 10 miles out in either direction of the column that was marching. All that was being foraged and then burned.
What was it?
Flee the slaves, take all your livestock, burn your plantations.
Yeah, I read today. It was like if they marched 10, 20 miles, it could be like upwards of like 30 to 50 miles wide would be the destination that he was doing. I mean, it was massive, vast of land.
Because think about it. You're a soldier. Wait a minute. But think about it too. If you're a soldier, you're getting it's all the booty you can get.
All
yours.
Literally.
They called them foragers, and they would just go out and it was basically just plundering. It was they're like Vikings going out there and just taking whatever they needed and just bringing it back to the army. I read accounts.
And then it was scorched earth, right?
Yeah, that's all it was.
Burning everything else.
And then he really didn't give a shit either, because when he had an army of freed slaves behind him now too, trailing the army.
So not only that,
looking for work, and he was like, don't let him follow us. And he got to a point where they had to cross a bridge over a river. I'm not sure which river it was, and he's like, burn the bridge. We don't want him following us anymore. So it's
Well,
like,
and not only that, something I found interesting too, doing a little more research on it, is they had like displaced Southern soldiers basically following everyone too,
yeah,
because they had nowhere else to go. So they're like, all
nowhere to
right,
go.
they're gonna hopefully they leave something behind for like some
But
scraps for us to fight over.
tore up the infrastructure. Like Atlanta was a huge
Right.
railroad.
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
And
like,
the
I think last time Ned used to talk about Sherman neckties.
Yep.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
what they're
Yep.
called. And they
Yep.
just tore up the rails. But yeah, so they made it almost impossible to resupply.
and not only
Lee up
the
north.
shit, what are they called? Were they telegraph wires they had, right?
Yeah.
Telegraph wires, especially in major cities that destroyed. So basically ruined the South's communication.
Yep.
Like having being generals in different parts of the, really the whole war, being able to communicate with one another.
So by the end of 1864, when Sherman gets to Savannah, the only two states that are unoccupied with no federal troops on them were South Carolina and North Carolina.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep,
And
because
that so you had ports too open still at this point too. So to answer your question, Austin, Lee could have been, if there were ships that could get through the blockade, they did have ports they could land in, right, in the Carolinas. But that's about to end quickly.
But I was gonna say, even like Louisiana, there was another campaign that was open at this time. Again, all using the Mississippi River. So once going back to last episode with the Anaconda Plan, once the Union controlled the Mississippi River and obviously the blockade of most of the southern cities, they would just go up and down the river and drop off troops in different parts. Like there was a big Louisiana campaign that tried to shut down, that tried to basically do like what Sherman was doing, just more southern, like even further in the South.
Yeah.
This was going on. So like you said, what was it? Every state except North and South Carolina had Union troops in them at this point.
Yeah. Every Confederate state. Yep. This is also the time too out west when you had from the Bleeding Kansas time in the late 1850s, pre-Civil War, you had these guerrilla groups, on both in the North and the South, that were just militia style, that were just savage, and they were waging total war because they were going after civilians as well. And later on, these guys ended up becoming like the great bank robbers and stagecoach robbers in the 1870s and 80s. The Younger brothers, Jesse James and his brothers, and they all started in the Civil War in Missouri and Arkansas.
Yeah, robbing cattle as well.
Exactly. Outlaw Josie Wales, same thing.
So something else I found interesting in the research is the advance of military technology, with things like the repeating rifle started to show up more and more, which is not a musket like you think of, where you load the ball down the chamber, then you have to put the gunpowder in, and da 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 da. So the technology definitely improved a lot during the war. But one thing that really came around was trench warfare actually started, which is something that not a lot of people know.
Yep.
So
Petersburg.
Yeah. So what you're going to see with with World War I basically started here, over 50 years earlier, with worse technology. So obviously that's another reason the casualties got a whole hell of a lot worse once, the technology improved even more than it was.
Right.
Total war.
Yes.
Sorry. Keep going back to that. God damn.
That's an interesting topic too, because the Civil War was one of those rare occurrences where the technology, the strategies, and the tactics kind of aligned. You didn't have anything that was outdated or outmoded. They didn't fight in squares like Napoleon fought. Napoleon would put his infantry in squares.
Or he didn't have cavalry riding into machine gun fire like you had in World War
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know you guys are all big fans of hardcore history. I don't know if you've listened to the World War I podcast.
Yes.
But in the first episode, he talks about, like, it was the first war they had machine guns. So he talks about how they use like their normal tactics of just trying to charge, and it just
mowed it down.
Yeah, the primary source is it's really terrifying. They're just like, it's just blood and death everywhere. But no one survived.
Yeah, and KDL's right though, because it was Longstreet actually who conceived the idea of building a trench system around Petersburg and then around Richmond that was later used in Europe. And it was him. They credited him. They didn't use it in the Crimea, which was the next big war in like European conflict. They didn't use that. Also, when you think about it too, is they did have those Gatling guns, those first, but they didn't have
the Maxim gun.
But think about it. They didn't have repeating rifles yet. So you didn't have like Springfield. Those came out 20 years later.
Well, not the bolt action ones. You had the lever rifles.
The Winchesters, right? Like,
yeah.
You still had the single shot, so you already had like a big technological leap there that, like you said, KDL, was so advanced by the time of World War One, it was just a slaughter machine. You know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They also had
Absolutely.
the Colt revolver came out around.
Yep,
just
the
like right before
revolvers
the
there.
Civil War.
Yep.
True, but that I'm thinking of like for the
Oh,
silver
I know,
rifles.
but I'm saying there was a sidearm though.
It was
The
a sidearm.
cavalry was the Colt.
Yeah.
Colt
But
revolver.
and was that even like lever action, like it's self reloading, or do you have to keep pressing the lever on its own?
For the Colt?
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think you had to. I don't think it was a self. I think you had to pull. You had to pull the.
I think you had to-
every time.
You pull the hammer every time, right? Yeah.
All right,
So
all
that
right. We'll
was-
catch you later. Thank you.
Yes, thank. It was
you
already
for
Minahan.
coming.
He'll be back next week. That was
Marriage
total
changes a man.
total dog barking.
Dog whistle. So
But yeah, no, you're right because it was World War One was really bad because you had old tactics and strategies
Mhm.
with brand new weapons, including tanks.
Mhm.
right.
Oof. Yeah.
So you had the trenches used in places like Petersburg, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the Union gets to they settle there in the summer of '64. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you have the summer of '64. I believe it was late June. I want to say so Grant continues to go further and further east, trying to outflank Lee. The goal is to get to Richmond. They settle on Petersburg, which is another big railroad hub, big city that they try to take over. Lee rejects them, and then they end up basically, I believe, surrounding the city. I know they put it to siege, so I'm assuming they surrounded the city, and then basically it was a 9-month siege of Petersburg, going from the summer of '64 then into '65.
Yeah. But I think the strategy behind that was that, he just tied Lee down too. Lee couldn't go anywhere either. He had to stay there. And in the meantime, you had a guy, a rather incompetent general rose up for the South, Jubal Early, who was one of Stonewall Jackson's sub generals or lieutenant generals, who was good, very good as a lieutenant general, but with his own divisional command, just shows that you can't. Just because you're a good lieutenant commander, doesn't mean you can command an army even bigger. And he actually marched within 20 miles of Washington.
Yeah, he gives Washington a scare even while basically the whole Northern Union Army is surrounding Petersburg.
Yep, exactly. So while Grant is down, 90 miles away, I think Richmond or the Petersburg, that area is, he's right there 20 miles northeast of Washington, poised to attack. He didn't. Big mistake, number one, because it was literally undefended.
And it would have forced Grant to pull back.
Exactly. And but he let I think he either beat or had beaten back Philip Sheridan, who was a cavalry general. But then he didn't destroy him completely, and he allowed him to regroup. And then Sheridan ended up just peppering, being pesky to that army. And then Early ends up with, he withdraws when he had the upper hand. And also Grant did send him some troops to help him out, but still he had an opportunity to I don't know if it would have ended the war, but to really give them a long breather. It could have extended the war for all.
Oh, absolutely. Right? I'd say it would have extended it at least through 65.
Yeah. Lincoln would have had to, the whole government would have had to evacuate somewhere.
And they would have even after they resolved the whole thing, they would have had to regroup and basically do what they did the year earlier, just try to do it all over again, get back the ground they would have had to give up.
It was a huge loss of opportunity, and he ended up getting his entire army destroyed by the end of 1864. So that took away the threat of any invasion of the North. It also in the Blue Ridge Valley of Virginia, that was very fertile. It was still growing crops, so it wasn't totally ravaged by war. So he lost all that. They had no longer any protection for their supplies and their food for the army. So he was an idiot. I got to read more on him, why he made those dumb decisions. Yeah, and you also had I think it's telling that he Early didn't go and try to get around get around Grant's forces and attack from the rear or anything like that. Yeah. I think it's just sheer manpower thing. Again, they're not gonna. The amount of troops that Early had wouldn't have done anything. It wouldn't have mattered. Yeah. Well, maybe this was a conflict in strategies versus new strategy and old strategies. The newer strategy was, like in World War II, was kill the opposing army. Right. Back then it was, I think Lee believed that, but I think other generals might have believed, no, capture their cities and towns.
We'll capture the capital and end the war.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily the case. You have to defeat the
always
enemy's
just move
army in the field. You can always
Right.
move. Exactly. You've got to destroy the army, make it incapable of resistance. Then you win the war. So early, maybe he didn't have the manpower, but that's a good question, because why wouldn't he have just, instead of going to Washington, why not just turn his army south and attack Grant from the rear?
Well, and that's my thinking, because if the goal was to pull Grant out, he would have just attacked Washington, which would have done it.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I'm just wondering what is. I'll read up on that, because I don't know that answer. So it's interesting. So where would he go? Where do we go next?
Well, I was going to say something interesting. We'll wrap up because the siege of Petersburg goes through the end of '64, and really once that ends, the war is pretty much about to end once that breaks. But you heard about I forget the actual name, but they tunneled at one point. They were trying to tunnel under the other side.
Oh yeah,
and I forget the name though. Where
and the Union blew up a huge mine underneath there.
Oh, that's right. It was just the battle of the crater.
The crater, right?
In late July. That's right.
Yeah, that's gruesome. Again,
so what happened?
Ahead of their time.
So it was the 48th Pennsylvania. So again, they're sieging the city of Petersburg, trying to find any way possible to get in. Mm-hmm. So these guys in the Pennsylvania infantry dig under their lines, underneath the Union, or underneath even into the Confederate lines, and just put massive amounts of explosives underneath, and blow a huge crater into the part of the Confederate lines.
Yeah. Yeah.
Massive.
They literally wanted to blow a hole in the Confederate line that from underneath.
Right.
Yeah.
Literally.
No, and people. So another strategy that lasted through World War One, because they had tunnelers on both sides of World War One too, basically trying to do the same thing. But I forget the actual size of the crater, but it was so big that you had people who were trapped in the bottom that survived the explosion literally died because they couldn't get out.
Yep.
It was 100 feet wide it was like 100 by 170.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And it was, and it
30 feet deep.
Yeah.
And it didn't work, obviously, because the Confederates just got up on the ridge of the crater and just fired down and killed everyone.
They basically made like a big moat. Like not only can it blows a hole, but you can't go into it. And if you go into it, the other, the South has a high ground, so it didn't work. It didn't do anything.
It was stupid. But we've got Sherman heading towards Savannah. We got Bedford Forrest running rampant through Tennessee, trying to, but only with the cavalry, nothing major.
So he was so Bedford Forrest was behind Sherman, basically just kind of harassing the back of his line, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that the one? Is that the guy Forrest Gump said he was named after?
Yep.
Right.
First Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
That's right. That's right.
Who he's named after. Yep.
Yeah.
But he had no military training. He was like I want to say
none of them
either
did, though.
a businessman or a teacher or something. But man, give him a rifle, put him in a saddle, and he was a terror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Just harassing Sherman's line. So again, Sherman's continued to go to Atlanta, not to the sea. We established that he's going to Atlanta, and so he's battling. And he has a similar strategy to what Grant did in the North, by just basically, all right, well, I'm going to either go left or right. If you guess wrong, I'm going to get around you and then destroy you. If you guess right, then we'll have another battle. And the Southern general, I forget, is it Johnson?
There was a number of them. They kept switching them out because they weren't successful.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but they were basically
Johnson,
fighting a
Hood.
defensive.
There was another one, Johnson, Hood. Basically, the Southern generals were fighting in a defensive position to protect Atlanta, but the people in Atlanta didn't like that. They wanted it to stop, so they brought in John Bell Hood, who was a bit of a psycho, very aggressive general, and of course he goes out there and attacks Sherman and promptly gets defeated. It's like, great, good job.
How many men did he have?
Not as many as Sherman.
Oh, yeah.
Sherman had 110,000, and in that army for the South there was just over 50.
Yeah.
Wow.
Jesus.
So it was a lot of actually, speaking of the world wars, there's a lot of what the Soviets did at the beginning when the Germans attacked in 1941 was a lot of strategic withdrawals. They defend a spot, inflict as many casualties as possible, withdraw to the next line. They did that 9 or 10 times as Sherman made his way to Atlanta.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
And actually, even better, the Finns did it to the Soviets in World War II, and then ended up turning around and went on the offensive and beat the shit out of them. So they would fight because they didn't have the manpower either. And the Winter War of like 1940, the Finns would fight, kill as many Russians as possible, retreat, kill as many Russians, retreat. And then when Russians got weary of it and were deep into Finland, then they just turned the tide. They got some reinforcements as well, and then just drove the Soviets right back into Russia. And actually took quite a bit of they threatened St. Petersburg for a while. So it can work, but that did not. The South did not do that though.
Not very well. So I was gonna say that's pretty much an effective strategy used in modern warfare, not used great by the South here. So you have September 1st, so late summer, early fall. You have the fall of Atlanta. General Hood, after basically going out and getting his ass kicked and having to retreat back to Atlanta, realizes he just doesn't have enough troops anymore and withdraws. And then Sherman's in there with his army the next day. And then, like you were saying, RA basically just keeps on going to Savannah pretty soon thereafter.
Now he's heading to the beach.
Now he's marching to the sea.
Exactly. And in between Georgia and Savannah, there was no Confederate army, right? Wasn't he just he was just going?
Nope.
He was just tearing shit up.
Yep.
So I wanted to pose this question: from Georgia to Savannah, his march to the sea was his Atlanta to Savannah. Thank you. Was his total war strategy necessary at that point? Maybe from Tennessee to Atlanta it was, but at that point, like going to Savannah, you have no opposing army attacking you. Why do you have to decimate the entire land like he did?
So you can decimate enemy morale. When you bring total war to the civilians and you start looting their plantations and you start burning all their shit down, they're going to say, hey, we should probably stop this war.
I mean, was that necessary? I mean, if you just you see an army of 100,000 people.
It's total war, Austin. There are no rules.
Are you someone who's against dropping the atomic bomb, Austin?
No, I'm just posing the question.
Yeah, what's your problem?
I'm not against it.
Austin loves limited warfare.
Yeah, he does.
Loves fighting. Loves limited warfare.
Yeah.
Why do everything you can to win?
But I have to agree with RA because you had to break their spirit.
Yeah, you had to just demoralize the public. It's one thing to demoralize the military that the public reads about, but when you show up and demoralize the public, it's a much different game.
Like, watch me as I burn your house down and destroy your crops.
Yep. I mean,
that's going to set a tone a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's going to be a little different than being like, oh wow, like they just beat
Atlanta fell.
Atlanta fell, and then all of a sudden, you get a soldier just like knocking on your door, like, hey, by the way, we're just going to destroy your whole life. Like,
by the way, your house is now going to be our headquarters. Your house is our headquarters. We're going to slaughter all your pigs, cattle. You're not, we're going to leave, by the way, next week, but we're going to keep your house. You guys can go live.
The funny part is we're not even going to eat all of it. We're just going to kill them.
Yeah, just going to kill them.
Whatever we don't eat, we're going to burn. You can't have it.
Yeah. Right. You're not going to have them either. So
yeah,
I mean, there is a number. Do we have it handy though? Like how much cotton they burned? They just fucking burned it. Even though it was worth millions of dollars, they're like, yeah, we don't want it. Burn it.
Producer RA is on the case.
There you go.
But that's why you have these massive, like, basically refugee camps following Sherman's army, especially after Atlanta, because they had nowhere else to go.
So I also asked the question because at the same time they are hurting Americans, and the goal at the end of this war is
not at that time. They're not.
They're still Americans, and at the end of the war, you're trying to reunite the Union. Like, so you demoralize them to a point where they're not going to want to rejoin the Union. Like it's a double-edged sword. Like you can go. There is a point where you can't go. You can go too far.
I was going to say, but I think it's to the point though where you're not giving them a choice at this point.
Right.
They did not count the amount of cotton.
You're going to join us back. You're going to join back with us, or this isn't going to stop. Like, I think it's like you're not giving them a choice at this point. You're saying you're going to join the Union again.
Austin's got a point though, because the resentment that was bred by those actions, led to those. You read about him, right? Theodore Roosevelt's mother was a unreconstructed Southerner. And she was from Atlanta. She was from a very prominent family in Atlanta. And she died in 1880, whatever, an unreconstructed, as he described her. She believed in the Confederacy. So you had 2 generations, maybe even more, of, being told by their daddy what the Yankees did and told by their granddaddy. So what I'm saying is, like, Austin does have a point, though. You want him back in the Union, but doing that, did that help the mindset or not? I mean, I kind of at first thought, yes, you got to break their morale. You got to break their spirit. You have to.
I mean, in the moment, you can't think 30
That's
years
true.
from now.
Right.
That's true.
If you're trying to end a civil war and reunite a country, you're going to be like, well, there's going to be a lot of unreconstructed
But
something.
you can't try to end a civil war to just start another war later on. Like, the goal should be that you have lasting peace. And if you decimate it to a point where the people are so distrusting of you and have such hatred for you, eventually they're going to fight you again. So there is a limit to how far he could have gone or should go if you're fighting a civil war. Where if this is like you're fighting a foreign country, fuck it, just go after them. In my opinion, but when you're fighting a civil war and eventually you're trying to get these people to rejoin your country, there is a limit.
How much resentment would there have been if if that didn't happen and they still took away everyone's
resentment
slaves?
anyways?
Like they still took away people's, like, you know what I mean? They're in their minds, their property was already destroyed because they lost all their slaves. So
I think it was negligible. They would hate him anyways.
And you know what, Austin, too? Remember, too, each state thought of themselves as their own country. It was the union of the states. So I think Lincoln's goal was to bring them back into the union. The Georgians were thinking, this is my country that they're destroying. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, speaking all hypotheticals, obviously.
Yeah, of course. But maybe but could the way the North treated the southern states, occupied the southern states for up to 5 years, in fact, imposing their will upon a defeated people and removing those in power and then putting new people in power, could that have extended the resentment, which led to, like, say, Jim Crow laws and sharecropping?
Well, I mean, I think
which would have happened anyway.
Maybe would it? If it was more structured, would it? It wasn't. It wasn't very structured at all.
I mean, the Army was there for over a decade.
The Army was there until I think the last day was 1870. It was 18. It wasn't that long. It was 5 years.
The actual Army itself, the Reconstruction went on a lot longer than that. Like the
Reconstruction only went on to 1875.
So a decade. So okay, so you're saying the Army wasn't there the whole time? But I mean, no. Even still, though, I think the Jim Crow laws, I think, were there either way because it's a racial thing. I don't think it's hey, they treated us really badly, so we're gonna.
No, what I'm saying is it's just a proposal. Had Lincoln's plan of bringing the states back into the Union progressed, because he was only in help me out, RA, the first year of his second term.
Yeah, he'll be sworn in and.
He was just sworn in, right? So he had over 3 years to go, where perhaps his plan, if he could have kept the radical
11 months,
if he could have kept the radical elements of the Republican Party at bay, right, in his own party, he could have maybe brought the South back in on better terms. Kind of like the way Europe treated Germany pretty shittily after World War I, right, and eventually caused World War II. So, I mean, maybe if Lincoln had brought them in under his plan,
Johnson didn't do a very good job.
No.
Had Lincoln survived and actually had handled Reconstruction probably the way Lincoln wanted to handle Reconstruction, I'm sure it would have gone a little smoother. But I don't think the Union's occupation of the South would have happened regardless of Sherman knocking, people, burning down your farm. Like I think that would have happened regardless.
But I think what I'm saying though, right? But I'm saying with the resentments that it left behind might have been mollified under Lincoln's plan of bringing the South back into the fold, as opposed to the carpetbagger. You've all read about the Northerner who goes down there, and puts uneducated, just freed slaves as mayors of towns. Yeah, I mean, come on, come on, you can't do that. First of all, the integration of the newly freed slaves. The newly freed slaves
must be banned again.
You can't just bring in the newly freed slaves and without educating them and assimilating them into society, which they didn't.
Yeah.
What?
Keep talking.
What? What do they say now?
What do you think? What you've been saying?
It's the truth. What I'm saying is, it could have been a completely different scenario.
Yes, if
Lincoln's plan had been put into effect. What did I say that was wrong? I still don't know.
It's
the watch back around like the 44-minute mark.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just the context prefacing that what you were saying. You weren't saying anything that was incorrect necessarily. It was just the way that Ari
The
was
joke
trying to
loses
frame it.
value when you have to explain it.
Yeah,
It was terrible.
it's okay.
You're
It's
just
all
going
right.
to have to watch. It's fine.
It's all right. Let's watch it back. So you were talking about, yes, Lincoln gets
Another week
reelected.
off YouTube.
Yep.
Yeah.
The damn history buffs at it again.
Doesn't like people governing.
No. So Lincoln obviously gets reelected in November '64. You got Sherman marching to the sea officially, according to Ned, or according to RA, in this time as well, late '64. The siege is still going on in Petersburg. And I think we talked about this with Lincoln's first inauguration. That didn't come till March, and then he dies in April '65.
Right after Appomattox, which was what, April
Right.
9th? He dies on
Right.
the 15th.
It was like a week after.
Yeah,
that.
less than a week. So I wasn't trying to wrap it up. I was just saying that there's, with all the stuff that's going on, Lincoln gets reelected and then doesn't get inaugurated till, a month before he dies. And there's really not much else. You got the siege of Petersburg. You got Sherman basically blowing up everything in the South. The Anaconda is tightening. The Anaconda plan is working.
It's basically just an end game.
Yeah, and now it's an end game. So you have the fall of Petersburg. I'm trying to find it. Where is it here?
Well, yeah, Sherman, went up the coast, and Savannah surrendered. Right? He didn't really. He took it, but
he didn't want
to
to touch Savannah because it was so beautiful.
He gave it to Lincoln as a Christmas present, I think, in 1860.
With a bunch of what did he say? I saw. Oh, Sherman's March to the Sea. By the way, $1.6 billion in damages in today's money.
Holy shit!
Wow.
Yeah,
and that's not a very industrialized South either. That's tough to do.
Correct. Yeah.
It wrecked 300 miles of railroad and numerous bridges and miles of telegraph lines. 5,000 horses were seized, 4,000 mules, and 13,000 head of cattle. Confiscated 9.5 million pounds of corn and 10.5 million pounds of fodder, and destroyed uncounted cotton gins and mills.
Wow.
Gins and mills.
Gins. There you go.
Yep.
Now, and Charleston also surrendered too, right? Once he took Savannah, he turned north.
Charleston
I've got the Lincoln quote from.
Charleston.
So Sherman telegraphed Lincoln, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 heavy guns and plenty of ammunition and about 25,000 bales of cotton."
There you go.
Holy crap!
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah, $1.6 billion worth of damages.
So you have that going on. It
was just worth it.
Yeah.
Total.
So
war.
Sherman's moving up through the Carolinas towards Virginia. You have the fall of Petersburg, which I believe it's in March. I believe it's late March. And it's quote unquote Lee's last offensive, basically his last stand.
Yep.
Petersburg will fall, and then you have Lee retreating in early April. Richmond falls right around then in early April as well. And then, the second week of April 9th, you have the battle, it's called, of Appomattox Courthouse, and then the surrender thereafter.
Yep.
Any thoughts on the surrender of the end of the Civil War, gentlemen? Anything you want to? I guess I'll go first. It seemed like it was the South more and more was a. Oh God. It seemed like the South more and more was a.
12.
Jesus Christ.
That's what we had to do.
Was really.
Where are you going to go from there? You're a Civil War hero.
President of Washington and Lee College.
That's where the county was where he won the first prize.
That's where he won the first prize.
Same county, Lexington.
That's very true. So essentially what happens is one domino falls and the next and the next and the next, right? You have, the fall of Petersburg leads pretty quickly to the fall of Richmond. You have Sherman continuing to move up from the Carolinas. This is now clear endgame. This is, the walls are closing in on the South just in terms of their manpowers, next to nothing. Obviously, their supplies have been greatly damaged by Sherman, their communication, their transportation of goods. This is playing out finally the way the North thought it would, with the Anaconda Plan years ago.
Yeah. Yep. There were still some pockets of resistance in the West, but in effect, once Lee surrendered, it was over.
So a man where they signed the documents was a man named Wilmer McLean's house. Wilmer McLean,
Yeah.
And so his house was like heavily involved in the first Battle of Bull Run in 1861 and was like destroyed, and he had to like flee more or less. Fast forward 4 years later, he's involved again, where they show up at his house and are we going to sign some surrender documents? Like, sorry. So there's your fun person for the Civil War.
Yep. The story behind the McLean house is that the Civil War began and ended on his porch.
Yes.
Began in his porch, ended in his parlor, or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That's a good one. I didn't know that.
That's a cool. Fun fact.
So that signature you're talking about at William McLean parlor. That's in April 12th, and then you have Lincoln assassinated 2 days later, April 14th.
Yeah. Yep. Went to the theater.
You have a couple small battles
at the Wilbur, right? The Wilbur Theater? No, that show never happened.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, they're still waiting to do that show.
Never happening.
No way.
2022.
Yep.
20 in Saudi Arabia before they're at the Wilbur.
Yeah, can't wait. So there's a few smaller skirmishes late April, early May, and then you have it wrapped up. Really, it was just there was fighting after the surrender because obviously it takes a while back then for news to spread around, especially after Sherman destroys all the telegraph wire. So
through.
Yeah,
it's hard to spread word by foot.
And that's a wrap.
Ask Steve from Providence.
And that's a wrap. And it all happy, happily ever after.
Happily ever after.
There we go.
Yep. And just like that, the surrender signed, and then it goes back. Then you have peace in our time and no issues. And
now they focus on the Indians. They got a little break during the Civil War. Now they're going to focus on the West.
We'll say that. We'll say that for tomorrow. Save that for Net After Dark. So do you
know where they first used I forgot to mention this during Colt 45 talk. Do you know where they first used the Colt 45?
No.
Texas Rangers.
West, wasn't it?
Oh. Texas Rangers battling the Comanches.
Oh, look at that. Actually, I should have known that.
They wouldn't sell them during the Mexican-American War. They were just like, oh, these guns are kind of trash. Or I think it was they tried to sell it to the Army, but they were like, no. And then they used it.
Yeah.
Then they used it against the Comanches, and the Texas Rangers did. And the Mexican-American War came. They're like, "Ooh, these aren't bad."
Right.
And they used them as sidearms for the cavalry. Yep.
It was the only thing that could shoot faster than the arrows. The only thing the Colt 45. Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming a bullet can go faster than an arrow.
No, I mean,
repeating.
Time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
repeating. I gotcha.
You can shoot more arrows than you could a musket.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's true. Yeah,
that's what helped. They said it was a gun that won the West.
That's the Winchester repeater.
Yeah.
That's the same.
Didn't Ben Franklin suggest that the Continental Army used bow and arrows because it took too long to reload muskets?
Did he? I never heard that.
I'm pretty sure. I've read that somewhere, heard that somewhere, that Ben Franklin suggested.
I think we could classify that as not being a technological advancement.
That would be the
limited war. That's called limited war.
Yes, limited war.
LW Austin, limited war. Austin.
LW Austin. LW
loves himself a stalemate.
Limited war, limited casualties, and walk away.
All right, boys.
So that's kind of anticlimactic finish, but I mean, I
know, right? Like it was kind of like an end game in 1865, and that's it.
So
that's kind of what happened.
So I think going forward, we talked about this a little bit. I think we're gonna change the format up a little bit, where we go long form on a topic, and then we break it up over a couple different episodes, depending on how long we go, because we tend to ramble and go long anyway. So might as well pick a topic. Let us nerd out on it for as long as we want to, and then break it up accordingly.
I like that.
And what topic do we want?
We're not sure yet.
Japan.
Comanches. Well, topic pending.
Topic pending. We'll discuss.
We want to go deep into like the Japanese history. Come on, man.
We'll talk.
Remember Sako? What we talked about?
What did you wanted to do? You wanted to do. You talked us into like Rockefeller. That was just like the industrial age, and I was
we can do that too.
Checked out. No, we don't have to do that again.
Okay, we don't do that. Okay,
I was completely checked out of that one.
We did the Robert Barons. Remember?
We did the Robert. Yeah, we did the Robert Barons.
We did the Robert Barons.
The Robert Barons.
That was a good one.
All right, so you don't want to do Japanese history. Okay.
All right.
We'll figure it
Let's
out.
wrap it up.
That's all we
right.
got. That's the Civil War. We'll be back. History buffs, as always. R.A. Ned Austin. Thank you. Remember to like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review below, and we'll catch you later. Thanks.
Don't
everyone.
report us to YouTube.